So I was telling your mom, this is like an introductory podcast for people.
Yes.
A lot of young people listen to it. We have homeschool parents that play it for their kids, or they have
Okay.
like charter schools have used it. We're trying to get some more partnerships and stuff. So this is very basic. Think of what's not taught in the American classroom. This is very much the first time a lot of people will hear about
Okay.
this or hear about Romania and stuff. So if we could start by just setting the groundwork, can you get started by telling us a little bit about yourself? What's your name? Where do you
Yes.
live right now? What do you do? And what was your childhood? Where are we going to get started in this story?
Sure, no problem. So my name is Ooana Trien. My name is spelled Oona, and it's a very old Romanian name. My mother is Hungarian, and you interviewed her. And I was born in New Jersey, and I'm 43. And I moved to New York City in 1996 to go to NYU Tisch School of the Arts. And it was I think I gave my parents a heart attack because it was the only place I wanted to go to college. And so I applied early. And when they asked me, where else are you applying? I said, nowhere. Um, so, um, and so I came here in 1996, and I've lived in New York City ever since. My family also we used to have a home in Fire Island as well, which is a small community, beach community, but my father started a newspaper out there, and my mother actually ran it for a number of years. My childhood. So, I'm an only child. My mother is Hungarian, obviously, with a very heavy accent. And I still remember my mother learning English when I was really little. And so I would say that one of the things that was interesting growing up is, I really only became more aware of it now in the last, especially during the last administration, is really when I think I became acutely aware of the way that a lot of people look at Eastern European immigrants. I had never thought about it before, really. But I knew my mom had sort of had some moments, and growing up in the suburbs, she always wanted to move to New York City. But there's absolutely a bizarre sort of form of it's almost a xenophobia, if that makes any sense. Like, especially here's the odd part, especially about other women. If so here's the strength, like or dislike, the last president it's irrelevant really. The way that Melania was treated was pretty abhorrent. It was very strange. And I became very much, my mom, you could hear her voice. You could probably imagine when she was younger, she has some similar mannerisms. And I found myself often, defending Melania. It was just this like sense of, my mom speaks 9 languages, right? And, the way she carries herself, there's some similarities there. And also the sense of like, these women, Hungarian women, the Eastern, if they want to leave or go somewhere, they do it. Like, it's not there's no blink if you need it, it's none of that's, as women, I think it can be a little bit daunting when we see that these girls can, I guess I could say is the mean girl thing doesn't really end once I'm sorry to say, kids, in many cases it does. Please try to grow out of it if you're a mean girl.
Please do.
Yes, please do. It would do us all a big favor. But so I used to go back and forth also to Romania as a child when it was still under the Soviets. So I had a really unique experience in that way, because there was very few people were going to Romania or going to Eastern Europe at all under the Soviets. But my grandmother was there and my uncle. So I have it's interesting because the memories I have of it are very much obviously through the eyes of a child. But there's one story that I used to tell stories all the time, especially on social media, whenever people would get really upset or worried about the country. If the people were having a coronary because of who the president was, it's, to me, that was kind of quaint, I guess, because one of the things, and this has been a very difficult thing to kind of realize, is that there's a story, and I tell a longer version of it on my YouTube channel. But I used to tell this story just in print every once in a while as a reassurance. I never quite figured out how to tell it now as a warning, which is it's like a really strange pivot that had to happen. And I didn't start, recording any of these things until all this stuff began really in June when the violence began in New York. And the story, it's about a playground. And so, in Bucharest, there was a playground really close to my grandma's house. And I loved playgrounds when I was a kid. I was like, playground. I loved them. But this playground was this is where all the kids that I used to see regularly, whenever I would come back to Romania. And, imagine it's like going to camp, right? You come back and then suddenly you have to figure out who's who because people grow up and, things like that. And I get to this playground this one year and everybody's standing around in a circle. And there's a bunch of debris in the middle because there was a place that they just done some, what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say architecture, but that's not the word. Building, basically. They done some stuff over there. So there was but it was not so bad that we couldn't all come together and clean it up pretty quickly. So we're standing in the circle, and I remember I just said to them, and I used to be fluent in Romanian at the time, and I said, pay attention, pay attention, let's clean this up, let's do it. And nobody moved. And I remember thinking as a kid, they don't like me anymore, or they don't want to play with me, whatever. But these, the parents are holding these little kids' hands, and there's this look on their faces. And I'd seen this kind of expression before. I saw this expression when my uncle used to have to turn off the engine to the car whenever we came to a red light. And I once asked him why, and he got very quick, he was a very warm, sweet man. And so we were just like, there is no reason. We have to stop. It doesn't save the gas. It's not good for the car, but we have to do it. Just like that. It was this weird moment where I realized that asking somebody something when there is no real answer, I now understand this. It hurts your sense of self. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it reminds me of what we're doing today, whether it's law enforcement, where they're forcing us to comply with these ridiculous things and they're just following orders, or people that when they're asked questions about science, the answers don't exactly make sense, but they keep pushing these talking points that still don't make any sense. It's very fascinating. That's what my mind went to immediately.
Of course. I'm in New York City, right? So you can imagine, I'll touch on that in a second, but Solzhenitsyn wrote Live Not by Lies, this essay that I would say that when all the mandates and all the pandemic stuff began, I actually printed it out and I had it kind of pinned on my wall, which is a very strange thing, but I kept looking at it and looking at it and looking at it because I somehow instinctively knew, remembering that kind of stuff that was going on. Sorry, I didn't finish the playground story. So when I asked everybody to help, at one point, I can't remember if it was a mother or father. They looked at me and just said, "Nuput," which means we can't, but we mustn't also. It's kind of the thing. And I saw this look in their eyes and they were afraid, seriously afraid, which I was years later that I really asked my parents about it. But I just remember leaving that playground and having this awful feeling of just seeing people that they could physically fix something in front of them. They physically could do it. It's like a perverse version of Adam Smith and the Invisible Hand, right? It's and I experience this now. We could have, during we could have left the house, or we could have gone to have kids to go to school. These are things we would be able to, could have gone to a store, could take off a mask, could, in my case, could go into a museum not too long ago, and now I can't. These weird things that start to happen. And I later learned that the reason that they weren't moving at all is that there was it would have been considered an organized event, basically. They could have been arrested just for doing that. Just for cleaning up the park together. That could have gotten them arrested. And when you think about that, and I suddenly had these flashbacks to I remember some people were cleaning up something in San Francisco once, and these people were actually complaining that they were taking somebody else's job. And that's part of it too. See, it just occurred to me, that's what the pursuit of happiness is really all about. It's not the accomplishment, it's not happiness. The pursuit is what is the most, I don't think people understand that it is, that there's a value in that, and that there's a reason why these things create, whether we want to talk about wealth or not, if we talk about just the wealth of creativity that comes out of this country and how remarkable it is, especially you mentioned China, right? China can have all these successes, but they struggle with creative invention. They do, because you can't have that mindset unless you are in a country that has freedom.
I agree. Well, I always think one of my favorite quotes is from the Federalist, from Alexander Hamilton, when he wrote his preface. And he said, the Constitution is the greatest way to guarantee your liberty, your dignity, and your happiness. And I think our dignity is really taking a hit these days. Our pursuit of happiness, our ability to pursue happiness is taking a hit. And it's a real shame. And so that's why I'm happy to be interviewing you, because you can be that connection between the past because of your family's history and the present. And it's really unprecedented.
To any person who wants to try to understand how to tackle what's going on, and I would say just curiosity, whether any age group, adult, child, Live Not by Lies by Solzhenitsyn is an incredible place to start, because he gives actual pragmatic, practical advice. One of my favorite sentences from it is, the lies pervade everything. The lies corrupt everything, but not with any help from me, which is a terrific thing. And you mentioned Hamilton, and so I'm a proud geek. Like, I'm a total nerd, and I was a member of the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society long before Hamilton was cool.
Well,
yeah. So my father took me to Weehawken and all that. So the reason I bring that up is because, I was very fortunate. So I came to New York to study the arts and study theater specifically. I'm not an actor. It was really I'm a little bit too much of an academic kind of person, I think, to have fully. I've only started performing now because, 43, who cares? Like, it's not like I'm trying to get an Oscar. I think a lot of artists, when all this started, we can't stop making things. Like, I can't stop. I don't know what it is. But I remember I got to see Hamilton very early on in the production, and I know there's a lot of people's talk about the show. I will say, and I am a very picky person about it, is an exceptional play. Like, not just good, exceptional. And I was lucky, you got to see it before it was a big deal. And I'll never forget, I actually cried because of him. My absolute favorite founding document is George Washington's farewell address, which was written by Hamilton. So there's this scene in it when George, like the way they talk about George Washington stepping down, and the way that they interpret it is, we're going to teach them how to say goodbye, which is, I think, a beautiful sentiment, first of all, because if you think about that, clearly we haven't quite mastered that yet. Again, like, and I'm not even talking about those. I'm talking about the ones before. Like, it's this weird phenomenon in that way. But I think you know what I mean. And and our country was never meant to have this sort of obsession with our government. We were never supposed to trust our government. Not really. We're supposed to trust our principles. And and George Washington's stuff is so gorgeous. So I'm sitting there in the theater, I'm bawling my eyes out. As Hamilton's words are being put into music, and some of the other songs that are so beautiful. And there's this one moment where he says the lyrics are, the group of them are, beginning of the revolution. They're saying, raise a glass to freedom, something they can never take away, no matter what they tell you. Fast forward to today. I can't go into that theater. I couldn't go see Hamilton if I wanted to. I wanted to go. I can't go into a theater. I can't go into a museum. And I'm an artist. I went to Tisch School of the Arts. I've been in New York this long. I wouldn't be able to go into the 9/11 Memorial Museum, and I lost a friend on 9/11. There's so many things that are going on that, to me, are reminiscent of the last century, both National Socialism as being Jewish, but also what happened to my grandfather and what happened under the Bolsheviks to many people as well. That suddenly, it's just determined that you are less than human. You are not even hated, it's contempt. Contempt is worse than hate. Contempt is like, you can't even bother hating something. There's two, what is it? And I've been feeling this progress over the last month since the mandates went in. And I'll tell you, it is the most terrifying experience I've ever had in many ways, because when the mandate went into effect, and I have this letter from the doctor, and he's Romanian too, by the way, which is funny. Like, he actually went to the medical school that my great grandfather built. Like that's kind
Wow.
of a, yeah. And so, I did overhear my mom talking about she's only, 15% of what she would have been. And I'll say that, I'm only here because my grandfather's not. And I know that. And I'm only 15% of what he was. He was an amazing, what they were. More than anything, and I say this, I know you're in Texas, right?
Yeah, I'm from Texas.
Right. So wherever, people are in the States, I would say that if it could be done happening to me, there's as much as we do have federalism and I states' rights, but one election away from having it happen to you. And so I'm fighting hard, and one of the reasons I wouldn't have left, I hadn't left by this point is someone, well, I'm not going to leave my mother who survived that world to this world. Like I can't do it. If you, for anybody who's not familiar with, the last century and, all of the various forms of terrible leadership that people like, being kind of in this vice grip between Stalin and Hitler and then Mao and, all these unbelievably, 500 million I think was the last count. And that's how many people I think have died total from I think that's between Mao and Stalin, or maybe it's even higher than that. I don't even know anymore. But at a certain point, how do you even quantify that? And so that's one of the things that I always end up kind of wondering, all this talk about equity, right? The only thing I think that you could do equitably, truly, is die. I hate to say it that way. And I don't mean to be dark, and I don't mean to scare kids, but I'll tell you that for anybody who's, learning about this stuff now, my generation didn't learn about this stuff, even though I learned a lot from my parents. And I don't think that was a bug. I think that was a feature. Does that make sense?
No, that's what I'm kind of curious about. So you had your firsthand experiences that were told to you by your mom.
And my own experiences of going to Romania, yeah. But
what was that like going to the American education system? What were they saying about what happened in the 20th century versus what your parents were saying?
I was very lucky. This is one of the things so my mother, because of, talking about education and things like that, when she was talking about it. So I was in 3rd grade in public school. And my father, I grew up actually, Tony Soprano's hometown. That's where I grew up. So in an much older house, but that's North Caldwell is where I grew up. So small town, good school system. One day, my parents were taking a trip to London and said they were going to bring me along, and it was over Thanksgiving break. And so there was a couple extra days that, I requested if I could have a couple extra days off of school, and they said yes, but they gave me an assignment. And I told my mom that. And so when we're in the plane, my mom says, Ooana, you should do your homework now. And I said, okay. I grabbed my notebook, write a line, close it, put it away. Wanted to do your homework. So I did it. Says, how could you have done it so fast? What was your homework? I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, I did. I said, open the book, showed her the page. And she said, well, what was the assignment one? I said, they asked me how the British celebrate Thanksgiving. They don't. That was all I did. I mean, what else are you going to say? Right. And so my mom saw that. And that was it. I was being removed from public school. That was 4th grade. I was in private. I was like that. She applied, she put, I remember, so I applied to quite a few different, private schools. And I mean, I still remember, because my mother, to her, education is, if you think about, I think she may have told you that she got a language teacher every birthday, and she just wanted a bicycle. That's how she ended up with 9 languages. Like, my grandfather, I don't know whether it was 14 or 16. I don't even know. But see, the thing that people don't understand is that, yes, for sure, there were some people who were, a lot of people don't know there was such a thing as Jewish nobility under the Habsburgs. Like, they don't know that, and a lot of Jews don't even know that. But he was a baron, and, came from, like, his family was titled. But one of the things is that being wealthy and like being noble, like, it's going to sound a little hokey, and I don't usually say this. There was a period of time where being noble meant something. Like you meant you were you were expected to behave nobly. Now, not everybody did, of course, but not, I mean, now we've just got a very strange bunch of very wealthy oligarchs that aren't really noble at all. So it's like, but in this case, my mom once said that money's only good for one thing. It's to enjoy all the freedom money can't buy, but also it comes with a responsibility. So they would be building theaters, hospitals, and they're part of, education was a huge part of that, having a well-rounded, thorough education because it was expected. Like knowledge isn't, if you don't have to be working 8 hours a day, doing hard labor, if you're just sitting there doing nothing, you're an asshole. Like, I mean, if you think about it, and I mean, trust me, I would love to, be wealthy enough that all I could do is just be, thinking all the time and, coming up and writing and all that. I wish I could, but a lot of times now it seems that we've got a whole generation of people that have that, and they waste a lot of their time being pretty petty and pretty snarky, but that was what, and so my mother comes from that world. And so I started private school in 4th grade. And I will tell you, my 4th grade was the hardest year I've ever had, because it was really a lot of
transition.
Work. And I mean, most kids actually repeated the grade, and I didn't. And the lower campus of where I went to school, it was like that at the time. That was like disciplining and training you. So that, I mean, I never had more homework than I did in 4th grade. I'm not even saying that we had a little. I mean, it was just a lot. Like, it was intense. But then after that, everything starts getting easy. And I mean, that's the truth. So like for me, college academically, it was easy. It becomes easy because you get used to these things and you learn how to do certain things. And I'm not saying, I don't think it's the same anymore, unfortunately, where it is. And I think there's a lot of schools, like even I've been hearing crazy things going on with CRT in private schools all over the place. And so I don't think that they're immune, but my experience was that I had a very good education. I mean, there's holes in it, but I never went through an indoctrination of any kind. In fact, the only exposure I ever had was when I went to college, and I went to an art school. I went to NYU. You'd think that I would have been like, bouncing off of, RevCom and like, and the way it is now, right? I wouldn't have been
because it's really bad, even in private schools. I think a lot of parents think, okay, as long as I get my kid out of public school, I'm going to be good. As long as I pay a little bit of attention to their curriculum. And it's like, no, you have to watch the curriculum now. You have to make sure that even the private school teachers, when you're paying out of your pocket for these teachers, not just your taxes, or charter schools, even it's Catholic schools, horrible. Christian schools. I've seen it all over the place. It's all based on whoever the administration is. I mean, the headmaster that was at my school when I was there was amazing. Mm-hmm. Okay. So when the new one came in, and then another one, and then suddenly, I mean, look, I think part of it was that people, oh, progressive education sounds like, this sounds great. Here's the thing is that I don't think, unfortunately or fortunately, that, for parents who really want their kids to succeed, and I think, and I say this not in the sense of like going to one thing that I think is terrific is I don't think that people are going to be just looking at studying towards Ivy League education anymore. I mean, to me, it was never that huge of a deal, only because I knew, when it's something that I knew that wherever I really wanted to go, I would be able to figure it out. I mean, maybe that was deranged, but that was just the way I looked at it. Like, I just felt very confident about it. I mean, it was easy. Like, I mean, maybe too easy. Maybe I didn't challenge myself. I don't know. But I'll say that I had exceptional teachers that taught me, first of all, like how to learn. It doesn't mean I'm always right. Just, I like learning. I remember the first time I didn't know I was, missed something. And I had no idea what I was looking at. A test the next day. And it was the glycolysis cycle, the Krebs cycle. And I was like, it was Greek. And I remember looking and staring at it for like 3 hours. And then it all came together. It was like I saw the parts moving, and it felt something I never forgot, because it felt so good to know that I could do that. And being wrong that wasn't the end of the world. Getting a D wasn't the end of the world. What mattered was how was I learning? Was
was it right? You know, and so when I went to NYU, I brought that mindset with me. And so it was pretty funny. I was the weirdo that my first 2 weeks short of my first semester, I went to the head of the department and I told them that a teacher threw a book at my head, which they did. And I got all my money back because I was not paying for that. And I know how that sounds. To me, that just made sense. Like that's the thing I think, one thing that happens with when I went to private school, we were not rich at all. It was a struggle to go. I knew that I was paying for my education. And you know, why would I pay a teacher to throw a book at my head because they thought that Doll's House was 3 acts when it was only 2? Like, think about that.
Well, and that's why a lot of people are worried about detaching the payment for an education for schooling, especially by having like student loan forgiveness in America or free college for all.
Exactly,
it completely removes your desire to make sure that you're getting a quality education, the desire for you to care that you're making a good investment.
And it also removes the incentive from the people who are the educators and the administrators, because they're, I mean, I hate to say this, but I really do think that one of the things that kind of, and I never used to speak quite this, I'm going to sound arrogant, snotty, you know, like, especially to a young person, I'm going to sound like I'm being, that I'm not seeing nuance. And you know what? I would say you're absolutely right. I'm not seeing nuance with what I'm about to say, but there's a reason for it. And the reason for it is that I look at teachers and I look at education, like it is, if you have a good teacher, it changes your life. If you have a bad teacher, it changes your life. And so I could recognize the difference. I wasn't a brat. I wasn't, you know, I wanted a good education, but if there was a teacher that was mediocre or less than mediocre, I wouldn't tolerate it. Even back then, I mean, it was the one place where I was very confident in this, even before I would be confident in anything else. I mean, I was the pain in the neck that if I went into we had this English requirement, you know, we're writing requirement, but I'd already gotten, you know, done very well in my APs and I'd done really well SATs. And I found the writing to pay for something where I'm asked to write an introductory, 3 bodies and a conclusion. I'm like, I shouldn't pay for that. And I actually went and complained and I got another teacher that was still, I had to do the requirement. But it was interesting because even just doing that, I suddenly was placed in a class with some people. I mean, I still remember it was the first time I ever met a woman that she was so brilliant. I was blown away, like what a great writer she was and how talented she was. And I was like, oh, I gotta be her friend, you know? And that was kind of the way these things started for me with school. And then the one time I ever had what would have been indoctrination, 100% would have been, because I was studying experimental theater and classical. So, and I had a minor and a major, but another major, but think about that. Like by all accounts, I should have been like waiting, like neck, like high in Foucault and Derrida. And like, I mean, that's what it would sound like to me now, but I wasn't. And the first time I ever encountered like a critical theory class, it was supposed to be a postmodern art class, which is different than the philosophy. And everyone was clamoring over each other to take this class because when we were going to be graduating, postmodern art was going to be our bread and butter. The Simpsons, you know, Rick and Morty, like all the stuff that was coming out, which is just one of the tricks to understand. Just when somebody talks about the art form, it's self-referential. So like Deadpool, you know, like memes, right? So that's what I was expecting, but the teacher was gone because they had to go on sabbatical, and it was taken over by a TA. And this course that was, you know, everyone wanted to be there, this massive lecture, very quickly deteriorated into a seminar. And I normally would have left, but there was this weird moment I had where I'm starting to realize that this person is going to try to tell me, instead of talking about art, like that there's the patriarchy. Like, what the hell does that have to do with what I'm doing? Like, are you kidding me? I mean, plus my mom's Hungarian and her mother was a lawyer and her mother's mother was a lawyer. Like, you know, granted, it's the toughest time I've ever had being a woman is actually now. It's weird, to be honest with you. And I would say that there's stuff we have to, for the first time ever, we have to seriously be concerned about. But back then, so I'm sitting in there and I realize, I look at this teacher and I remember thinking to myself, I want to get an A, even though she hates me. That's my goal. And it was like, mission. And I did. and I had fun. And I like would, pull out, confidently saying, no, Judith Butler is a terrible writer. But how could you say that? Because she is. Like, it's just, but that's the thing that comes, like, if you could be fortified, this is what's so sad, I think, right now, and what's so scary, but also what a huge opportunity. Because right now we can actually say, all right, kids can be fortified that it doesn't matter who they come across. It doesn't matter if they know, if they both have the humility and the patience and the self-reliance, like Emersonian level self-reliance, to kind of know who they are and what they're talking about, then none of that stuff will touch them.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Like self-reliance, when we talk about just why socialism is so bad in the first place, I like to touch on the fact that so many conservatives, we've been so quick to say socialism. Oh, you mean like or not a lot of options and products, all these things of, oh, very expensive goods. That's not good. And I'm like, no, what's really dangerous.
But what you said, you realize, like, it's not about goods and choices and goods and services so much as, but it's
the bigger issue with socialism is that it creates a reliance. You're now reliant on the state. You're reliant on the government, and they can take away that thing, whatever they're providing, the food, the healthcare, the shelter, any moment.
Absolutely. And listen, I'd never believed this until I'm experiencing it because of the situation that I'm in. And I have to struggle and fight against it. It's a really bizarre, and that's one of the reasons I've become very non-nuanced.
Yeah. And it is now what I'm kind of curious. What I'm curious about, you were talking about, like, we can fortify our kids. A lot of people will come to me and say, we've got to fix our colleges. That'll save our children. And I say, no, the problem is they're going to college with no fortification. And so they fall for those lies really easily.
100%. And
also fortify them, elementary, middle school.
And also building parallel poli, like Václav Havel talked about parallel structures. Like, so I will say this, and this might get me in a lot of trouble, but if we look at, don't miss it. Like, I will be deferential towards, intellectuals that earned it or should have it. Like, I will default to assuming, like, I'm not a cynical person. That's another thing. Cynicism, like, I'm what's called a zennial. Like, we were the most optimistic generation. Like, we were just, like, woo! So I still have it. And I mean, cynicism is really dangerous, especially in times when things are tough. It really is. So I'm not being cynical, but I don't have patience for intellectuals who don't behave with honor and character. I just don't, because what we need to remember, and this is stuff that, learning history and learning and understanding a lot of these things, and also learning how to learn includes starting to have a sort of an instinct for when something is not just propaganda that's taught by the state, but propaganda that's taught by your own social circle, right? So I'm in a weird position, a little interesting position. So I'm Jewish, and my grandfather was killed by Stalin. So I've heard it all. And I will say sometimes that it's tricky because people don't understand, even when I talk about Bolshevism, I get nervous for it. And I'm like, wait a minute, why am I even not wanting to utter that? And it's really because we have done such a lousy job explaining that none of these things, I mean, if we think about how complicated the world is, in what universe would Hitler, Stalin, World War II, especially post-Wilson, post-Wilson, I have a thing about Wilson, sorry, it's a little, but in what world would that be simple? It's not binary. That's another thing, is we live in a very binary, I think, world now. And
now, what I'm curious, you hear a lot of American leftists today that will give credit to the USSR and the Bolsheviks for fighting the Nazis and defeating the Nazis. What are your thoughts on that as a Jewish person that had a grandfather killed by Stalin?
Crazy, actually. So, I mean, I almost I'm so much crazy that I need a little nicotine to talk about it. Sorry, especially right now.
It's fine.
So the reason it's hard for me is that what I hear when somebody says that, because so there's two devils in this game. Like, there's two, Hitler was a terrible person and Stalin was a terrible person. And I say this, there's a lot of evidence that would lean towards that he was actually much worse, much worse. Now, the thing is, I say this is that, first of all, Hitler was defeated, right? Second of all, we have to remember that Hitler and Stalin were actually allied. They were in partnership. They were planning to invade Poland together. And when that didn't happen, because Hitler decided that, a Slav was, because Hitler was practicing a racial socialism, that we needed a homogeneous identity. Like all we're trying to get to that same place, but each, like China in many ways is very much National Socialism now too. There's a homogeneous society, very much based on, there was really not that much of a distinction. And so the thing is that people will say, well, because he didn't, own, take over the means of production. That's essentially applying one view of socialism and communism, not the goal of socialism and communism. I mean, there was socialism before Marx. There's this misconception. I mean, especially amongst Marxists. Marxists like to pretend that everything begins and ends with them. Like that's just kind of Americans are like that too. But whatever it is it wasn't only Stalin that defeated, Hitler. It was all of the allies. But also, if I'm going to talk about it strictly from a perspective of a Jew, there was a lot of chances we had to do something to stop it, to get rid of it. People knew where the train tracks were going. Hungary wasn't. So my family's Hungarian. In 1944 was when the Hungarian Jews were taken, and they killed over 300,000 to 400,000 of them in 3 months. That's a lot. Like that's a crazy amount of people. But it was toward the end. So there was how many years to try to. We can't say that people didn't know what was going on. So for me to delight in like, yay, Stalin's defeated Hitler, no, it doesn't work that way. Plus, then there was Yalta. When Yalta went into place, and we basically allowed this guy who, first of all, one of the reasons that they lost so many people is Stalin and had no issue with forcing and sending more and more troops to their death, like no issue with it. It didn't matter. So what did he say? He once said something like, a certain amount is a tragedy, another one is statistic. Mm-hmm. For them, I mean, and also this is the other part. So when you think about the philosophies of these people, right? Hitler wanted people like me gone. They wanted us gone, and then eventually the final solution came about because they couldn't just put us all on Madagascar, right? Now, there's worse things than wanting somebody dead. It's wanting their entire being. That's what Stalin wanted. That's what the Bolsheviks want. They don't just want your agreement, right? They want your mind. They want your agreement, not just your like tacit agreement.
Now, kind of thinking back to the history of it all, I love how you know this, by the way. Most people don't know a lot of this information, and it really hurts my heart to know that. But
well, I'm so thrilled that you know it, and like I mean, listen.
Thank you. I'm a little curious. So, when did you start going over to Eastern Europe and doing that as a child?
I went to go see when I went to Romania. I was first time I think I was less than 6 months old.
Oh, so this was right.
I was going my whole life, like, and so when my mother earlier mentioned that I had a dress thing from Ceausescu, which I was like, okay, we're not going to understand this. So you have to understand that nothing is as simple as bad dictator and he's gone, everything's fine. It's not like that. And I mean, and Romania is actually, I think, a remarkably interesting example of this. And it's something that a lot of people don't really know about, which is that my mother needed to have a good relationship with them so that her mother was safe. And even with that good relationship, there would be occasions where I would oftentimes think I must have said something on the phone that was bad in some way. The Securitate was not happy, and they would cut off my grandmother's hot water and heat because a kid said something on the phone, right? Securitate was really like, when Stalin took over Romania, Romania didn't have a communist party. So he just swept in and, it was really intense. The Securitate was vicious. like cruel, vicious. That's
And so what did they do? Were they like a police force or the
like
enforcers?
secret police, everything,
Secret police.
like,
Okay.
torture, just pain. Like, I'll put it honestly, if things keep going in this direction, that's like I have a friend who's Romanian. He's on Twitter. In fact, I think Emily's gonna be talking to him. He came here from Romania. He's saying his opinion is that our intelligence communities is already securitate. I would argue against that, only because what happened to my grandfather was so intense. You understand what I mean? Like, he's also younger, so it's a little bit of a. If they were, we couldn't say this.
Yeah. Well, and that's what really shocks me when I interview people from Cuba and Venezuela, especially, they will tell me they have PTSD when they see the burning and the rioting and the looting of Antifa
Absolutely.
and Black Lives Matter, because it reminds them of like the Chavistas and the collectivos.
Oh, listen, this sounds weird. I've now realized that there is such a thing as generational trauma. I know there is. Like, I never thought it before, but one of the reasons I wouldn't leave here is, my parents live on the 26th floor of an apartment. I'm a few blocks away. My block was looted. I heard it. I never started posting on Twitter until an NYU professor actually was defending the looting, claiming that, she said something like, and Soho's not really part of New York City anyway. And I'm in New York. Listen, I was here for 9/11. I was like, so really, let me try to understand this. The moment that the artists, didn't, invite you, I should have said this part I didn't say, but they didn't invite you to their parties. Suddenly Soho is no longer part of New York because what? The bourgeois gets to decide who's the proletariat now. Like, I mean, that's the thing about these people that's really drives me crazy, because I've met in Europe, I met some people who were ideological communists, that were philosophical communists, but not ideological communists. So they could say, it's a belief system, but I see where it can't work and why it can't work. And usually one of the things I always remember hearing some say was the new man paradox is what they would call it, which is something that almost nobody knows what that is. No one knows what the Soviet new man is. No one understands that there's a version of this stuff where what's so insidious is that it cannot, the belief is that man, it's almost like original sin. It's really weird. You know what I'm talking about, right? That man is not capable of like here's, we promise you communists, but you got to be dead for it. And then like the whole thing is ushering, like the struggle sessions, all those struggle sessions, that is part of creating the new man. That's what's so freaky. And I mean, there's a lot of that happening. I see it whenever we see this stuff happening now, where I'm treated like I'm not an individual, or I hear some, people who have that philosophy thing that they don't believe that consciousness exists. I mean, obviously communists don't believe in God. Okay, fine. We know that. But when you get to the point where they don't believe in consciousness, that they don't believe in an individual, that they won't believe in anything divine about it, they were like a block of wood, that gets a little scary. But I'll tell you, what my experience right now will tell you, yep, that's exactly what they believe. Because I'm being treated that way. I'm being treated like there's no cost in denying a person who loves the art so much the opportunity to be part of art. Like, think about what I mean by that. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like there's a bad judgment.
Well, I'm glad that you put that twist on it of art. I was speaking at a charter school in Colorado for this youth leadership program they have, and this girl raised her hand and she said, I don't know much about any of this. What I've learned of socialism and communism is pretty much from you right now, but I hear from my friends that are the artsy kinds, and they're the more liberal and lefty kinds on campus and at my school. And they say that it's the left that is going to be more welcoming to artists and to the creative types. But from what I hear about history, that's not really the case. Is that going to be the case for me, or would I even be able to find employment? And what was cool is the woman next to me, she came from communist China, and she could personally say, well, yeah, there are going to be some art jobs for you, but it will be creating propaganda. It will be helping the CCP create art that changes people's minds. It will be making commercials and propaganda films. That's what you're going to get to do.
Well, I mean, if you look at Ai Weiwei, like if you look at the artists, this is a thing that's actually really interesting to me about it. So first of all, I mean, and the only reason I think it's one of the things that's really important for people who are not on the left to start to, and I say this with the hope that people understand why I'm saying this, is that, you know, Mao wrote that essay called Combating Liberalism, right? It's a one-page essay. In that essay, he basically tries to defeat liberals. So why would he want to defeat liberalism if he's a liberal? Because they're not liberal at all.
No.
They're illiberal. So the word has been co-opted, you know, and so every time we say liberal, so for one thing, it's because they're illiberal, they aren't good for artists, because you need liberalism in the truest classical sense, like in the sense of the Enlightenment,
classical liberalism,
sense, right? But in the thing that ushered in, because liberalism really did usher in. I mean, everything that, you know, founding of our country, all of that stuff came from liberalism. Like liberalism, not in the way that people hear it. Like when they say, oh, liberal, what they're actually saying, in my opinion, is radical collectivist. Because the liberal requires the autonomy of the individual, right? It requires, like, if I would put it like this, maybe I was thinking about this recently. The collectivists, like the radical collectivists, they will say that we should cooperate because we should both view each other as equals. And if we cooperate, then we're going to accomplish something through cooperation. A liberal, like a true liberal, would say, no. Let's collaborate. We acknowledge each other as individuals and respect each other's individuality. And then from that will come something that we can't even really quantify. You can't, that's where the kind of like the magic happens, right? Does that make sense? Like you can.
No, absolutely. Well, I always think of Sun Tzu, The Art of War. He says you have to understand yourself, but you also have to understand your enemy. And for me, I see it as when we group the liberals and the leftists and the woke people all in the same group, and we just call them the left, or we call them liberals, we call them crazy people, we're doing a huge disservice to our goal. And I would say our goal is to get people back on a foundation of classical liberalism and economic independence, the way Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals have been on for centuries.
Exactly.
It's a shame.
Exactly.
And that's why I get frustrated. I speak at a lot of older conferences, so the crowds are older and they want to know what the heck is going on with Gen Z and millennials. And so I try to explain to them, yes, there are really radical people that actually want to seize the means of production. They think that we're going to end capitalism and make some utopia.
Even worse, they want to destroy property.
Yeah, like they really truly believe it. And then there's also these really naive but well-intentioned young people. And when we speak to those naive but well-intentioned young people that just are lacking basic information, we need to be talking to them about, hey, you're being lied to and you deserve the truth. Instead, we're just being so rude to them and we're shoving them closer into the arms of people like AOC. So we have to be more efficient with our communication.
And one of the things that I would hope, and I see it a little bit, but, you know, in my generation, I used to joke and say in the 90s, I'd be like, the right has the worst PR. I used to say it all the time. Because back then, if you remember, like, it was a very different time. But there was a radical Christian right that was, they were like the original woke. They were a pain in the ass. I'm telling you, real major pain. The only protest I'd ever been involved in up until now, trying to make sure that I can go to the bathroom sometimes, you know, if I'm it's insane. There was a group that was protesting a play, and they were, you know, it was radical Christian right. They felt that the play was inappropriate, and there was even bomb scares and stuff. Now the thing is that what gets a little scary, what's really weird is that the thing that the far left and I think that there is a woke right that doesn't realize it's woke, right? And there's a woke left, right? The thing they share in common is both of them will constantly defend censorship. And what is really challenging and wonderful, but it's not easy. If it was like if liberalism was easy, everybody would do it, right? It's simple, but it's not easy. But it doesn't mean good either, right? Is that you have to be able to deal with what happens if somebody says is something unpleasant or even dangerous. Like, what do you do with it next? What do you do next? And there's this really bizarre, and I blame my generation, the older folks who I think we got very protective after 9/11. Maybe I'm not sure what happened, but this whole safetyism and this idea of being safe and feeling safe there is so much more to life than safe. I mean, I'm not saying people should get hurt. But if your aspiration is to feel safe, no, your aspiration, like I remember this guy, Nick Hudson, who runs this organization called Pandata. It's one of the first groups that was looking at the pandemic response, and it was very much against the lockdowns, but also from a quantifiable, like you can look at what they're saying. It's a great group. I would definitely recommend checking them out. But he recently did a Spaces where he basically talked about being safe is about the least important. I'm curious. I'm interested, and also being happy. He said, this was interesting, is about the least important thing to me too, because I much rather experience curiosity than happiness. I made a little video recently about this, trying to find a way to talk about what's going on. And I really realized as I was explaining a little bit about what it's like and trying to encourage artists, there's an art to medicine. There's an art to the sciences. Like arts and sciences, they didn't always work like this. There's a liberalism kept them together,
I always encourage people, I may commentate on things and I may like to talk about things and we may bring guests on, but there's really nothing that can be better than you reading something for your own evaluation and then coming to your own thoughts about it. Like I used to listen, I'll be honest, I used to listen to Mark Levin every single morning, and he would play the national anthem, and then he would come on and he'd be like, hey, everybody, how's it going? And I'd get my 3 hours of him ranting. And then I would think that I know what I'm talking about. And then I really wouldn't have my own thoughts. And so I don't like to listen to people have their own opinions and then just use those. I like to just get the original source. And so reading our founding documents is such an important part of that. Oh gosh.
And also not even like, so like, one of the things that it's a challenging essay for some people if they're not used to it, but the fact that it's challenging is actually perfect, because Self-Reliance by Emerson. It's I used to tutor kids, and there were some kids that it took us 6 months. Some kids a couple days. The ones I remember, this one guy, like 6 months, he was in tears afterwards, because it's about what it is about is being able to believe you can do that and doing it. And it's funny. I was thinking about this, like, because I'm a big Shakespeare fan, right? And I have a pet peeve though, because most people, unfortunately, like you get exposed to Shakespeare in English class, right? You made to read it, which it's not what's supposed to be. Little insight to everybody. It was never meant to be read. So if you didn't like reading Julius Caesar, you didn't like reading Hamlet, it's not your fault. You're right. So just, you have to learn how to read it aloud or work with people on it. And that's okay, and then it gets really good, actually. But, thing is, remember in Hamlet, he says, Polonius says, to thine own self be true. And then it's then follows as the night, the day that canst be false to any man, right? The reason I do this is that if you read it out loud, like Polonius is a villain. Polonius is full of polemics. So we have a whole society where everybody's like, my truth, be your truth, right? But Emerson says, he says, trust thyself. It's very different than to thine own self be true. Trust thyself. Like, it's like the idea of being in liberty versus liberation. Liberty is, you're born free, like liberty. Liberation is something that has to be, like, it implies like, hey, slave, I'm going to liberate you now. More than anybody really, some people in New York have been standing up and really fighting back. I think it's mostly because it's a little easier when you have seen certain things happen. Like, I think Jews used to be in that state of mind. I think Romanians definitely are in that state of mind now. That's why they don't follow the mandates anymore. They dropped it all because of what happened to them in recent years. Documentary called The Collective, if anybody's curious, it explains a lot about why now they were so, nope, we're not doing this, because they're accustomed to seeing, it was their first glimpse at corruption in the health system, and realizing that the Securitate had basically taken over their entire health system. And so if you know that can happen, being told that, there's some corruption going on with this, kind of like, yeah, and we're done. We're not doing this. Like, it's like, we've been there, we've done that. And nope, that confidence, that ability to say, all right, I've seen this before. And that's something Americans weren't supposed to have. But we better, agree. But we can fix it. That's the thing too, is that we can.
I believe we can. I believe it. Now, what I'm curious, we like to usually cut it out about an hour. And so I think we have so much to talk about, I think you should come on again. Sure. My personal belief, if you're willing.
I would be honored. I'd be honored.
Thank you. Thank you for the time on this. This is really special insight. What would, if you believe that this can be fixed, what would you say is a good action item, a good one final last thing that people can take away from this and bring positive change moving forward? Because we like to be solutions oriented here.
Absolutely. So I think, listen, it's going back to Solzhenitsyn again, right? One of the things he says in Live Not by Lesnar, obviously, wherever you are, you can just choose, even if you don't say, you just choose not to say what you don't believe. That's huge. Now, when it comes to what we're dealing with now, which is basically, I call it totalitarian creep, right? And I mean, a lot of the idea that you are unable to talk about something, you're being pressured and coerced and you can't ask questions, it worries me a bit. But the thing that people, I think, can do is if they're worried and feeling like they're not liking that they're feeling any sort of pressure, if they even have a little inkling of that, all you have to do is start practicing saying no. It's an amazing thing, because I actually I made these hats, which says no, established 2021, because we don't like, first of all, I think that a lot of, it's a magicalpaca.com.
I need that. I need that hat.
Oh, my pleasure. Oh, there's all different kinds. Absolutely. I love them. And so we'll go through and look at it together, and we'll pick you out one. But it's a classical, like Kiss Me on a Classical Liberal t-shirt too. And made in the USA, fortified in China. But basically, it was my way of, it's like, I see your propaganda and I erase your propaganda. But that's another thing too. So two things. One is practice saying no, and also realizing that no is actually, I think that there's a whole generation of us that always wanted to make sure that people felt that they were, able to try and not being held back. But no is loving. And having a mother from Eastern Europe, your mother will not let any harm come to you. A lot of that stuff, and maybe if this time hadn't happened, it wouldn't have felt this way. But sorry, I was having a bit of a moment because of how different my mother's been sounding lately. Even hearing her talking to you, saying that sometimes she gets scared, that's a very new thing. It makes me angry, I'll be honest with you. It's bad enough what happens to me, but my Edo Shanya, I'm like,
sorry.
Me too, but there's a lot of us out there. When we win, they will never be able to do this again. But no, and then also satire, make fun of it, art. These things like authenticity, by the way, as weird as the word sounds, it's kryptonite to these people. But also humor. Like if you look at some of the work that came out of Eugenie Ionescu, the satirist, learn the distinction between satire and parody, and that's really important right now. Learn, make jokes great again. Make jokes great again. Being able to make fun of something, it's massively important, especially when things are so absurd, because you have to be able to look at this and say, this is absurd, and make fun of it, because then it loses its power. So if I can it's true. And then also another thing too is in a time where people will cancel culture and all that pettiness and stuff, have the courage to just be the kind of friend you would want, and be the kind of, because that way you building that sort of level of integrity and trust, because in a place where you can't, I mean, it's one thing not to be able to trust your government. There's another thing to have this going on. This is nuts. And it makes us all feel very, but just giving that a shot, because I'll tell you right now, I live alone. I'm in New York. Everything that I know, and it's gone. And it sounds really strange for me to put that, even in my city. And it's been, it's long 2 years to deal with this stuff. The only thing that I would say that has kind of made it somewhat bearable is that I've said, what am I waiting for to not, just try. And if I screw up, I can't really get more embarrassed than I am. By it's something I have no control over. And then the only other thing too is I would say, and this is the request too, which comes back to the no stuff, don't buy the idea that America is gone or it's done, or that you have to have, especially some states they're saying we have to divide things up. It's total hogwash. If the minute we choose to have the minute people realize that the boot on my neck is a boot on theirs, because that's what the things that gets weird. How do you do individualism, but you also do That's nation. That's what nation and unity and the union's about. Like you choose, like kind of like New York had this sort of meta community where we used to have this attitude, like one for, you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us, that thing that got screwed up a little bit. No one's more independent than New Yorkers, but we were New Yorkers, right? Like Texas has that as well. It's the only other state I think that has that sort of, like New York, we were New Yorker before we were Americans, which is totally fine. Like Texas, like, but it's really, if the moment that we as come together as Americans and stop buying all the BS that, I'm telling you, I'm in New York, I worked at CNN, and I'm telling you, it's total freaking BS.
Well, thank you so much for this great hour. I think we've learned a lot, and we would love to have you back on. And absolutely, we just really appreciate it. Is there anything that you want us to be aware of, or ways that we can connect with you
sure.
on social media?
So I did start doing a YouTube channel, getting all this, and so that most of the stuff on there is all about actually the stuff. Like I have some satire, which is I created a Covidian temple character. Covidian, she's very much part of the Church of Quarantology, Fautological sect, and she's a lot of fun, and she's crazy, and so that's something. Yeah, she's very worried about the trans inoculates. They're a major issue. So there's that, and also in it there's I decided to one of my favorite short stories is actually Harrison Bergeron, and I recited it, and I don't always say, I very rarely say this, I did a darn good job with it. If you've never heard this story, it's an incredible story, because in the very beginning it says the year is 2021 or 2023, whatever it is, and everybody was finally equal. That's how it begins. And it's a really incredible, dark, dystopic, realize it gets pretty dark very fast from there. It says, they're equal in every way, thanks to the handicapper general. It's a very dystopic, but it's about equity is what it is. It's by Kurt Vonnegut. So that would be something, and comment away and criticize away. And my DMs are open on Twitter, which is at OOANA. And you never know an answer until you ask anything.
All right. Well, we'll link all of those things to, for them to be able to connect to you.
I am looking for somebody who was interested in helping me compose a song to get a little viral stuff to counteract those dancing nurse videos. So any of you out there,
I like that.
If there's anybody, it's been fun. So if there's anybody out there who wants to create a really fun, joyful, like, think Dee Snider's We're Not Going to Take It, or Breakout, or any of that stuff, but new, mixed with a little bit of Let's Go Brandon, but not just a little mix of all of it. I'm looking for somebody, so get in touch.
Well, thank you so much, and definitely get in touch, because I want a fun song like that. I mean, Let's Go Brandon really smashed the records.
Oh, it's
there.
So that'd be great. My best part about it, honestly, is that it is 100%. Like the first time I can think of it, the people are, there's no self-blame. It's just like, let's go Brandon. It's fun. It's fantastic. For the first time, Americans are not like blaming, like self-flagellating for like what's going on. Like,
right. No, but thank you so much. And we will have you on again soon.
I had to learn that lipstick of yours. I want that.
I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you. Okay. But thank you. We'll see you later.
Thank you so much.